Hi there, and thank you for tuning in to The Social Circus, where every week we dive into a variety of topics covering social media, mindset, and how to run your business. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Social Circus. My name is Sarah Thompson and I'm your host, and today I am thrilled to be joined by the fabulous Louise Percy from the Percy Institute. Hi Louise.
Hello Sarah, nice to speak with you.
Oh look, I'm so excited to have you here, and we've actually had a bit of a chat before I hit record today, and I'm really enthusiastic about what you've got to say, and I'm certain that my audience are going to get such value from hearing your wisdom and expertise. So before we get started, would you be able to tell everyone a little bit about your journey and your history into the Percy Institute, please?
Certainly. Well, the Percy Institute I launched in 1992, so actually 30 years ago this year, and it came about in a way which I suppose is rather roundabout. I was born into a military family. My late father was a high-ranking Royal Australian Naval officer. My first job, I was actually asked by the Department of Foreign Affairs then to look at being part of one of their programs. So my first job out of school was actually at the Australian Embassy in Washington, DC.
Wow.
I came back to Australia to take up a position at the Australian National University in Canberra doing international law and politics, but I needed a job for a few months. And because I had a security clearance coming out of Washington, I was invited to work as the executive assistant to the press secretary for the then Prime Minister, the Honourable Gough Whitlam.
Wow.
And this is all in the mid-70s. And then when Mr. Whitlam lost office in December 1975, I was the only member of his private staff to be invited to join the press office of the Honourable Malcolm Fraser. And so I did, and remained with Malcolm Fraser until 1980. I travelled the world as a VIP, obviously, working with a fairly irreverent bunch of journalists, I might say. My role to keep them in order. But I found myself here in Western Australia for family reasons and fell in love and stayed. And so in 1992, when my life changed, it was suggested to me by actually the late Premier, Sir Charles Court, that I had skills I didn't know I had, and why didn't I turn them into something? And so I hung up my shingle and the Percy Institute was born.
Wow. Oh, honestly, I could listen to you talk all day, Louise, and your story. I feel like we could chew the fat over quite a long lunch listening to all the tales you must have to tell. But so for those of you for my readers or listeners who haven't heard of you, tell me what the Percy Institute is and does.
Well, the Percy Institute is both a training and consultancy organisation, and we specify that our role is really to give people confidence by learning the intricacies of modern etiquette, both business and social. I also, having had Percy Institute offices in Singapore and Shanghai, consult quite widely on cross-cultural awareness issues as well. So my client base is corporate government, as well as small, medium-sized enterprises, women starting out their own businesses, men starting out their own businesses, and people who just want a little more confidence, knowing what to do and when to do it.
Oh, wow, fantastic. So I hope my listeners are all very excited and by how honoured we are to have you as a guest today, because obviously for us small businesses, they don't often access someone of your calibre. And I think what's really, really interesting is when you speak, my mind went back because I'm of not a dissimilar vintage to you. I'm a middle-aged woman, and I remember I grew up in rural Western Australia, and we used to go to grooming and deportment classes, and so that was like a kind of an early iteration of some of what you do, I imagine.
Well, it really was. I mean, I think that the doyen of this sort of thing in Australia back in the 60s was June Daly Watkins, and a lot of the people that have come to me over the 30 years, and of course now, having been in business for 30 years, I'm getting some of their children, which is a real thrill. It was really grooming and deportment to give women confidence, to know what to do, when to do it, how to do it, what not to do. And because we're in Australia, it had nothing to do with class or money or anything else. It was really confidence building, and that's for 30 years what I've tried to maintain.
Fabulous. And so nowadays when people approach you, because I imagine that there's some of us that would think, oh, this seems like something my grandma would have done. That seems really kind of daggy and a little bit old-fashioned. But when you talk about confidence, I think that that is more relevant than ever.
Oh, well, look, it is. And the world is a changing place. So, you know, we have the manners, but we've also got a situation where we've got evolution of manners. I mean, when I started out 30 years ago, we didn't have the internet. And you can only imagine what the evolution of manners have been, both socially and in business contexts, with regard to the evolution of the internet. I mean, we talk about netiquette, or we used, you know, in the 2000s, early 2000s. Now it's so normal for people to understand that the internet is an intrinsic, if not one of the most important components in the way that we do business. For example, there are manners around it, and particularly since you know, March 2020, when all our lives changed and we were spending so much more time on the screen. The manners have really had to evolve in a way, but it hasn't been a direct set of rules. It's been something that's evolved organically, really.
Oh, and when you said evolution, my mind went to, I do sound like my mum now. It went to devolution, because I do feel like manners are becoming something that we see less of, and I find it disappointing, because I think I can hear my grandmother saying good manners don't cost anything, and you know that. The way in which we treat people has an impact on them and has an impact on their confidence. And so when we treat people poorly and we don't honour and respect them, that has a ripple effect, doesn't it? So when we talk about manners, what do you think, if we're going to sort of modify our behaviour a little bit, and hopefully everyone who's listening will take this on board, what are some easy things that we could do that would help in the way in which we use manners in our modern day business life?
I think fundamentally, being kind and considerate to other people is really important. It's having the ability and the confidence in yourself to put other people at their ease. And we've got to remember that no one in the world does business with a business. They do business with people.
Yes.
And so by having fundamentals of please and thank you and good morning, and understanding the correct form of address of somebody, whether they're Mrs., Ms., choosing to have a gender neutral form of address, whether they're a Ms. or whatever, and wondering, you know, remembering that we're wonderfully multicultural in Australia. You know, not everybody wants or feels comfortable being called Louise in the first meeting. So I always would suggest to my clients that if you're meeting somebody, use a form of address first. And then if it was somebody saying to me, oh, Ms. Percy, it's nice to meet you, I would say, please do call me Louise, unless it was somebody from a culture which actually didn't appreciate that level of familiarity. And I think those sort of things, it's putting other people at their ease with you that will enable you to develop the rapport, which leads to successful business, mutually beneficial business.
And it's really interesting, because I feel like having worked here in Australia, and I've worked in the UK as well, we are very informal in Australia, and we become very familiar with people very quickly. And it was really interesting when I was in the UK, I worked for the British government there in communications, and we had to address people correctly all the time. Like, you know, right honourable and the member for, and you were never invited to address people by their first name. And even people that were maybe, you know, deferred higher in, like, you know, the leader of your team or something, that use of the formal address is something that we just don't see very much here. And I'm always surprised by that when we talk about even our Prime Minister, and the casualness with which we speak about them. And I feel like, is this an evolution in the way in which we behave, or is it an Australianism, or is it just part of the way in which society changes, do you think?
I think it's all of that. But I think that we Aussies do have this natural affinity to you know, be more casual. That's us. But if you're actually talking in business and you are dealing with people from a culture that doesn't have that affinity with that level of casualness, it's worthy of consideration in order to allow the form of address to come through. So, you know, and people will regularly say to me, oh, well, Louise, you know, if people are coming to do business in our country, why don't they just do it our way? And my attitude always was, well, you know, even when you were having play dates at school, you used to find out what the favourite foods were for the children who are coming over to play with you, or what they preferred to play, or whatever. Let's just be kind and considerate to each other and look at it from both sides of the perspective. You know, it's empathy. I think that's really important.
What a delightful analogy that is, because it's really, really true. And it's even in our adult life. It's my son's birthday tomorrow, and I've made it my point to make sure that all his favourite people are invited, and I've ordered his favourite cake, and it's all about making him feel special. And when we do that for other people, it makes them feel special, and in a very crude term, it makes our business venture more successful, doesn't it?
Well, it does, because you know, by having that empathy for the position of the other person, and you know, let's talk, we're just in the getting to know you stage, for example, in a business. You know, the art of small talk is really important too, because you've got to be authentic at all times. That's one of the great traits of we Australians. You know, authenticity is our mantra in a way. You know, don't ever try to be something that you're not. But you can actually present yourself as poised and polished in business, whether it's small business or corporate life or government business or whatever it is, by having empathy with the other person, by being able to make small talk confidently so that you can see the common ground and work from there.
I'm so interested when you say that, because I'm quite an extroverted personality, and I'm very talkative naturally. But I have to say, I struggle with small talk, and I particularly struggle when I have to go to business events, which we attend a lot of, regardless of COVID. And when we go to I actually attended something yesterday where I didn't know anybody, and this girl was making really nice conversation, and I felt myself feeling so awkward, and I thought, why am I so bad at this? I'm so talkative and friendly, and yet I could feel myself feeling awkward. And so when we are struggling with that small talk, what's some great tips that you could give us to help us with that?
Well, let's take your situation yesterday. So if you're going solo into an event where you don't know anybody, and we've all been there in small business, you know, I mean, it's daunting. It's daunting for me, Sarah. So always make sure that you arrive on time, because the organisers of that event are most likely going to be hovering near the entry to the event, function room, whatever it is. And if you arrive and you're on your own, they will naturally introduce you to somebody. Immediately you've got somebody to talk to, and you already know that you and that other person who you haven't previously met before already have something in common. You're at the same event for the same reason.
Oh, what a wonderful tip.
and so that's great. And the other thing is, have the confidence, if you're there on your own and you are talking to somebody, to bring other people into the conversation if they look as if they're hopping around the edges, looking like a white knuckle drinker, as I call them. They're the people who are holding their glass so tight their knuckles are white, and if you talk to them about the weather, they're going to be thrilled. So it's, you know, there are little tips and tricks that make you feel more confident too, because you're taking on that role of assisting others.
Oh, I like that. And so we don't have to become obsessed with being ridiculously interesting. It's okay to say, how did you get here, or it's okay to sort of say those things that might seem a little bit banal, but are actually icebreakers. It's okay to do that, because sometimes I overthink and say, that's so boring, and because I'm British, I default to talking about the weather. So
one of the other little tips that I was taught years ago by my father, who was the Commodore in charge of the Navy in Western Australia at one stage, was that when he would go back to his office, and he would have been at a function meeting, all these people he didn't know, particularly when he first took up the position, was with the business cards. And in those days, you obviously filed them manually rather than electronically. Always file them not in alphabetical order, because you'll never remember the people's names, but file them in terms of the function that you went to. So, for example, the function that you went to yesterday, if you did get business cards or whatever, file them under that function. And on the back of the business card, make a little note about the fact that you had talked to this person about such and such. Maybe they were going off on a holiday to Broome next week, or whatever it is, so that next time you go to that function and you spot that person, you'll be able to say something like, oh, Louise, look, I met you last time. It was the first time I'd been at the event, but you mentioned you were going to Broome, and I was so envious. How was your holiday? And so immediately you have that ability to start a conversation.
Wow, that's brilliant. And I'm kind of sitting here engrossed in what you're saying and thinking, why don't I know that? It's a really, really simple tips. Now, I also wanted us to pivot a little bit and chat, because we did discuss this before we hit record and it was very interesting. You were talking about, obviously, the way in which we project ourselves nowadays. Again, coming back to our very casualisation in Australian culture, and the fact that we often perceive ourselves as being distinct because we're behind a screen or we're doing a video, and so it's not in real life. But you were talking to me about the need to still show up and bring our sort of, I don't know if the word's best self, but sort of show up in a way that puts our best foot forward. So can you talk to me a little bit about showing up in a digital age?
Absolutely. So as I was mentioning to you previously, first impression statistics are really important. And the general consensus is that a first impression takes about 7 seconds. And there are 3 components to that first impression. 55% of it is your personal presentation and grooming. The way that you actually, let's talk about looking on the screen, the way that you look on the screen, the way that you present, the way that you make eye contact, and so on. So 55% is a pretty high ratio. Fair or not, it exists.
Yes.
35% is your verbalization and vocal tone. And verbalization and vocal tone is the way that other people hear your voice. So I'll give you an example. When I first started the Percy Institute, I used to do a regular segment on ABC Perth Radio every 2 weeks. And the first time I went in, it was so long ago, I think it was a cassette tape to the audio
Brilliant.
and said, well, 30 years ago, would you mind recording this for me? I'd like to start an archive. And he very kindly did. And when I got back into the car after doing this 20-minute interview, which I thought had gone pretty well, I put the cassette into the sound system and went to drive away. I nearly went off the road because the voice coming out of the sound system bore very little resemblance to the voice that I hear in my head.
Mm.
And so I actually went to a speech pathologist to actually lower the tone of my voice a little bit, which happened easily over 3 months with some exercises. And so I felt that I was able to then, when I was actually making presentations or speeches or training, whatever it is, I felt more confident in myself because I knew that the voice that the people that were listening to me was hearing was exactly the same as what I heard. So that's really important, that other people hear what you're saying. It's not got anything to do with your accent, but it does have to do when you're speaking for any period of time, as you would know as a coach, putting light and shade into your voice so that it's more interesting for people to listen to. Yes. And then the last 10% of that, first impression is your content. So you don't have time to mess it up. So be prepared. I call it the Percy Institute 5 Ps, prior preparation prevents poor performance. And it means having your bullet points, not referring to them by glancing down with your eyes, but having them in a situation where you can see them so that if you are going to have that 10% of your first impression as by way of content, it's going to be full on and authentic.
It's so helpful. And I really resonated, Louise, with hearing your own voice, because obviously I speak all day for a living. That's what I do. And I speak generally on camera and it's typically recorded. And I remember years ago, the first time I heard myself, I was like, oh my goodness, I sound like a man. I've got quite a deep voice. And my mum said to me that women with deeper voices have been shown to be more successful. And I was like, great, I'll take that. But it's really interesting because, like you say, you hear your own voice in your head. And then when you hear it externally, you're like, oh my goodness, is that what I sound like? I'm really used to it now. And I often say to my clients when they're first projecting themselves, maybe doing videos on Insta or something, do go and record yourself and listen to yourself, because once we step through that shock, and I'm certain we're all shocked by how we sound, it makes us more comfortable to talk in front of the camera, because you know what you look like, you know what you sound like, and then you can actually focus in on that 10% of what you're actually saying. And there's no fast way to that except through practice, is there?
No, there isn't. And, it's quite fun to practice. I mean, if you're not used to doing it, I'll say to my clients, who come to my masterclasses or whatever, what I'd like you to do is just turn the recording button on your smartphone and just put it in the kitchen when you're talking with your partner, your kids or whatever, and you will actually hear the way you really are, not putting on your telephone voice or your camera voice. to hear the way that you are. And 9 times out of 10, you'll be pretty pleased with it anyway.
Oh, that's reassuring to know. So if we are, which most of us should be in this digital age, presenting ourselves on either video or camera, like still images, what are some tips that can help us put our best foot forward, do you think?
I think being confident with your appearance. Now, that doesn't mean how you look. It means confident with the presentation of you that you're putting forward. So, for example, I would always suggest, and this is by no means set in stone, but if you tend to be a bit blotchy in the face, put some sort of covering on so that you're going to even out your skin tone for men and women. Make sure that you're using appropriate light. I, for example, love this position that I'm in at the moment because it's actually facing out to my garden with the pool and the light's coming straight in on me, and it's, it sort of inspires
Good natural light, yes.
Yeah, but that doesn't always work. So, I mean, there are tips and tricks out there, and you, I'm sure, have so many more than me, being the professional that you are in there. But I do think that turning up as the very best version of you is really important.
And
but your authentic self.
I would absolutely agree with that. And I was brought up, and my mum used to always say to me, if I was going out, I would say, how would I look in it? And she always said I needed more blush because I'm so incredibly fair, and she probably wasn't wrong. But I do find that I'm much more confident when I'm wearing makeup. I would be loath to turn up and cheat without any makeup. And that's not because I think that I'm awful looking, but it makes me feel more confident. And I definitely feel like that. So that really resonates with me. And I think what you were saying about putting your best foot forward and feeling your most comfortable, it's not changing who we are. It's not using filters to be someone different. It's showing up as your best self. And I always find that gives me so much confidence.
Absolutely. And look, Sarah, I have had a number of clients, over particularly the last couple of years when we were locked in here in Western Australia, and I was able to do lots of in-person masterclasses, which was super fun. A lot of people would say, look, Lou, I'm just not comfortable wearing makeup. And I'd say, okay, that's absolutely fine, but just do me a favor and put a little bit of blush to give you a little bit of contouring, put a bit of gloss on, and if you can possibly bear it, a little bit of mascara on the lashes, whether you wear spectacles or not, it just opens your eyes up a bit.
It does. And I do think I do have some clients that wear no makeup, and I think all power to them that they feel happy. But I know what makes me feel confident and feel like I'm putting my best self. And I know, particularly when I'm training, I don't want it to be something that I'm thinking about, because I'm certain that my audience are looking at me. And like you say, our attention wanders off. And so they're looking, thinking, oh, she's got quite pink cheeks and she's wearing a pink top. And so they're noticing things, even if you think they're not, aren't they?
Yes, and it's not a vanity thing. It's actually, for me, it's a professional presentation thing. And I so agree with you about, if you're there to do a job, you don't want to be thinking about the ancillary things. It's why a lot of people, when they come to me for dining etiquette, for example, if they're going into a job promotion, or they know that they're going to be having to schmooze clients in their own business, to know what the rules and etc. are for dining etiquette, so they feel comfortable, so they don't have to think about that. They can actually get on with the job that they're there to do, which is present them and their business in the very best light.
Oh, wonderful. Now, look, I think we could talk all day. You're so interesting, Louise. I'm mindful that I don't want to go on too long, and I would love for you to share, if people are interested in connecting with you, how can we work with you? It's probably a great question to ask.
Well, I do private consultation, one-on-ones, online training, in-person training. My website is www.thepercyinstitute.com. You can see me on Instagram as The Percy Institute, and also Facebook as The Percy Institute. And thanks to you, Sarah, I launched a Facebook group called The Elegance Club. And so if anybody would like to join, I'm going to be having all sorts of fun exclusive classes for members, some Q&As, some live interviews with people that have crossed paths with me along the way. So yes, and that's thanks to you, Sarah. I wouldn't be doing Facebook if it wasn't for you. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to take credit for that. And for all the listeners, please check out the show notes, because I'll put all of the links in there so that you can connect with Louise. I do absolutely love following you on Instagram, Louise. I always make a point of listening to your videos because you always share such pearls of wisdom. And to me, as business owners, and I think particularly as women business owners, we are judged so heavily on how we look. And if we can put our best foot forward and feel confident, I think it makes, like you say, it means it's one less thing for us to think about, which I love that as a concept.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. So thank you again, Louise, for your time and wisdom. And thank you to all my listeners for tuning in. I will look forward to catching you the same time next week for another episode of The Social Circus. Thanks so much for tuning in to The Social Circus. As your host, Sarah Thompson, I am thrilled that you've chosen to spend your time hanging out with me. I would be so grateful if you could spare an extra moment to go and leave me a review on your favourite podcasting platform. And if you even felt more excited, you could share my podcast with your friends who you think would get great value from it. Thanks so much again for tuning in.